Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Nantucket. I'm Kelly Williams, President of the Board of the Nantucket Historical Association and Chair of this year's Nantucket by Design. Ellen is the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Dean of the New York School of Interior Design. She herself is a certified interior designer, so she's a practitioner. And today she's going to talk about what has influenced design on Nantucket and how Nantucket has influenced design in the rest of the country. And so with that, I want to introduce you to my very dear friend, Ellen Fisher.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, I'm not a native Nantucketer, but after 5 years, I've really come to love all the things about Nantucket that you do. And I am trying today to bring maybe a different perspective to looking at the history of interior design. I'm not a historian, but as Kelly said, I'm a designer. And I think that everyone in this webinar is a lover of design or a designer themselves. And hopefully this will help you look at what you love in a slightly different way. Today we're going to try to understand interior design on Nantucket, its roots in local culture, and how the infusion of the decorative arts and cultural identities of areas of the rest of the globe have resulted in what we now appreciate as a quintessential American aesthetic. Through this presentation, I hope that as designers and lovers of design, we can come to see a physical place and that it has unique and identifiable characteristics, but it's not a formula. Remember always that a good interior and good architecture it's more than decoration, it's the evocation of place. Next. So let's begin with the obvious. Sometimes it's easier to know what we know by looking at other things. So my question to you is this Nantucket? Clearly not. Of course it's Paris. You can see this style. You can see this style, it's unmistakably Parisian. The traditional and historical envelope or room filled with modern and retro furnishings, decorative arts in the most unexpected way. And the scale of the room on the left tells us that this is emphatically a city. And as we continue, I'd like you to notice, though, become aware of the quality of light, both natural and artificial, and the sense of formality that's extended here in this design through symmetry and the choice of materials. Next. Is this Nantucket? Well, we're closer. There's red, white, and blue. But it's Florida. And it's Florida. There may be many of the same references that we might see in Nantucket, but the context is completely different. Please note again the scale and then the decorative accessories. So both of these interiors are situated in a tropical location informed by the climate. And as you look closely, you can become aware of the references to this relaxed Florida lifestyle. But no one who knows Nantucket would make the mistake of thinking that these rooms are on the island. Next. Closer, Nantucket. Here, the interior palette reflects the exterior of the home, as well as the quality and color of the light. This home is right on the water. In fact, it's a rustic place, but it's close and not quite Nantucket. The light here is cool, it's gray, and the color scheme is subdued. Many of the same artifacts might be found here in the East End of Long Island, but it's not Nantucket. Next. And this one might be more of the stumper than any other one. These two interiors are both so similar to ones we might find on island, but are they? No, they're not. And I apologize for spelling Kennebunkport wrong. But these are definitely not Nantucket. And mainly you can see that by looking through the windows, especially of the room at the top. So here, this interior reflects what's seen out the window, and that's a precursor to what we're going to see about Nantucket interiors. Next. And I put this one in here because this is a very, very iconic interior. This is Billy Baldwin's home in New York City. And Billy Baldwin has been highlighted lately by the NHA because he spent his last years on Nantucket. And in fact, as a boy, he lived there. He had such a definable style. And in this New York apartment, we see these beautiful lacquered walls. We see the sheer coverings on the window and a flat canvas. In fact, we see canvas upholstery, but it's quite polished, even though there are references to, like on the table, to a global influence. Billy Baldwin's often been hailed as the American designer. And this is what he chose to do in New York City for himself. And later on, we'll see what he chose to do for himself in Nantucket. Next. So this is the educator in me, but this is an important term, genius loci. It means the pervading spirit of a place. And scholar Christian Norberg Schultz coined it to investigate architecture. He felt that architecture as a work of art, and by that he meant interiors also because he was talking about dwellings, that the purpose of the work of art is to keep and transmit meanings. And from my experience in Nantucket and doing the research that I've done, I think meaning is a big part of what keeps people coming to the island and staying there. It's a place that holds great meaning for them. Dwelling, Christian Norberg Schultz wrote, is in an existential sense, the purpose of architecture. It implies something more than shelter. It implies spaces where life occurs, and that these are places in the truest sense of the word. A place is a space with a distinct character. And since ancient times, the genius loci, or spirit of place, has been recognized as the reality that we encounter in our daily life as people. And architecture, and by extension interiors, are the means to visualize the genius loci. And the work of the designer is to create meaningful places whereby we help people to truly dwell, to live their full life. Next. So let's look at Nantucket. And this collage at first glance looks very familiar to everyone that's been there or read about it or looked at pictures or visited for a day. So what do we mean by local influences? Well, Native Americans, certainly. Native Americans lived there for thousands of years. Quaker and early English architecture and settlements. African American. These are the essential American influences and local influences on design. And global. Cape Verdean, Filipino, Chinese, European. Everybody that's ever visited or was on a sailing ship and came and stayed and put down roots has gone on, their work has gone on to influence what we consider American Nantucket design today. Next. And I want to show you these small iconic images because they each have a meaning. Number one is the image of Abram Quarry and Dorcas Honorable in 1855, the very last Native Americans supposedly living on the island. 1855 was well into the history of settled, let's say, Nantucket, settled by the English and the Americans. Two, of course, is the influence of nature, and especially the intense light that reflects in given that this is an island, 30 miles in the middle, offshore in the middle of the ocean, the incredible quality of the sunlight reflecting off the water, the sand. It's an unbelievable aspect of the island. The oldest house, which is a typical or atypical lean-to, it's dated 1686, but of course it changed and changed and changed over time, right up until the 1920s when it became preserved. Item 4 is a classic Nantucket white federal style home, the one that we see and probably covet, so beautiful. And the hydrangea, actually there's nothing more symbolic of Nantucket than this color blue and this flower. And yet, of course, it's also a global transplant, having been brought here where it grows naturally in the Azores by the sailors from Cape Verde. Number 6, the lightship baskets, which are iconic on the island, also brought by Cape Verdeans and then expanded and established as an industry by the Nantucket Filipino community. 7, the mighty whale, still a symbol of the peak economic period of the island. And 8, an emblem of the China trade, the classic blue and white porcelain that represents travel and exoticism. And last but not least, of course, Nantucket Red, from the pantalons of the Breton sailors, but also evocative of the pink climbing roses that are everywhere, and especially on Sconset. So take one look at this because we'll see these things come through at every period of Nantucket interior design. Next. So let's look now at some of the interiors designed in a variety of styles in which the key elements and this expression of Nantucket genius loci are evident. In his book, Architecture of Nantucket, Clay Lancaster states that Nantucket has a persuasive harmony, a rhythmic balance of opposites, and an interwoven fabric between buildings and their environment, be it natural or townscape. And I think you'll see that. So because it's near and dear to my heart, and because it's the first major building in Nantucket, we have to start with the oldest house. Now, we all, or most of us know the story, but it's the story of a Romeo and Juliet setting. And it's not a typical house because it's quite large. But the interesting thing about this building from a design point of view and not a historical point of view is that on the ground floor, there are really 4 rooms, but 2 of them are major rooms. They're symmetrical, one on the right and one on the left as you enter. You enter into a small hallway with stairs up, and then these 2 large rooms open up on the right and the left. And they are almost a perfect proportion. So inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, the master builder who constructed this home thought about the proportion of these rooms. They're low ceilings, they're only 8-foot ceilings and even a little less, but the rooms themselves are roughly 16 by 20. And that's a ratio of 4 to 5. That ratio comes very close to the idea of a golden section or a golden proportion. And in the room, when you're in there, and the next time you go to visit, and you may not have visited for years, just stand in the space and feel how stable, how orderly, and how in some ways freeing that proportion feels. It's very innately pleasing to us as people. The other thing about this space is that it is the quintessential early Quaker or English home. The doggerel on the right, I was made on Nantucket Island, I'm strong and stout, don't lose or burn me, I'll never wear out. That is what they thought of, the early builders, when they built these homes. They're spare, they're functional, there's no excess decoration whatsoever. In fact, there's a decoration on the chimney, which is highly unusual, but they do just what they're meant to do, which is to shelter, to feed, to house somebody. But because of the way they're built, you sense that care that's in that space. Next, please. And of course, the Maria Mitchell home. This is later. This is another century later, built, actually, I'm not quite sure, built in 1790. And Maria Mitchell's father bought this, William Mitchell bought this house in 1818. And what I'd like you to notice is still that influence of simplicity, functionality. It's a different era, but on the right is this wonderful nook where Maria Mitchell claimed as her study. It does everything it needs to do. She created great academic research. She wrote, she corresponded with people all over the world, and she became the scholar that she was there in that space. We think about our fabulous home offices today, but she did everything right from that small space. And there's something incredibly beautiful about the light coming in from the left, about the size of the space, the intimacy of it, and the seclusion of it. Next. And of course, in contrast, greater light. I think greater light is kind of wild. You know, it's the epitome of eclecticism. These are women living in this building, people of wide-ranging intellect. They love ideas, they love art. It's the collection of their travels, of their ideas. It's the idea of a salon. And in spite of their Quaker upbringing, this is the opposite of austere. And in many ways, the Monahans who built this or renovated it and owned it, They epitomize the summer people who embrace the character of Nantucket, and yet they brought more of the outside world. Again, it's much later, but they were comfortable in bringing this wider world to the comfort of their home on island. Thank you. Next. So let's look again at Maria Mitchell's little study on the left. 200 years go past, and on the right is part of a design by Markham Roberts, 2007, of a desk at the end of a small hall. And you can clearly see some of these incredible aspects that we pick up much early on in this contemporary design. And I use contemporary not to mean the style, but the period. The beautiful light coming in through the window, the white walls and ceiling, and that sense of quietude, of peace. It's very beautiful. Next. And that really brings me to the next few slides, which I'll talk about the key aspects of design that any designer needs to be sensitive to and is sensitized to when designing for Nantucket and for Nantucket people. So first of all, without a doubt, is the quality of light. There's nothing comparable to it. It pervades everywhere. But the interesting thing about the light in Nantucket is that it does create this tension between light and dark. It's not unlike being on a ship at sea. Above deck, it's light. Below deck, it's dark. The other thing that influences Nantucket everywhere is nature. And especially, as we can see in this picture, the luminous colors of the hydrangea. And we know that they can range from violet to that beautiful blue all the way to pink and white as well. And it is an overriding, pervasive characteristic. But so is that beautiful green of the lush landscape leading down to the water. Next. We can't deny that whaling has a tremendous effect on the decor and the references and the sense of being at sea that's part of being on the island. I apologize for the bad photograph off the internet, but this kind of sums it up. We all know what a whale looks like, and we see it in lots of places, but it is that sense, even for people that never sail, of being connected to the ocean. And images of whales and ships abound in Nantucket interiors, from the horizontal shiplap siding to built-in cabinetry to the use of canvas and natural cotton fabrics, a sense of lightness, simplicity, usefulness, and a place for everything and everything in its place. Next. The iconic light ship baskets are, and these are from the collection of designer Susan Seisis Green, these are an emblem of all of the use of natural caning, woven grasses, of making into something useful and beautiful, something that is a natural material. Next. And of course, Nantucket Red and the pink roses that are everywhere, especially in Sconset. And I don't really think I have to say anymore. We all know Nantucket Red and we all know pink, and it's almost an equal profusion as the beautiful blue of the hydrangeas. Next. But I don't want to underestimate the China trade and its influence. And of course, it wasn't just China. It was all over Asia and even Africa. And as sailing ships came home and the sailors and the captains brought souvenirs back, these also became part of what, from the 1700s on, really considered an essential reference and part of what they thought of as a true Nantucket interior. So let's look at some contemporary work in the next slide. So the examples from here forward are today's interiors. This is again by Markham Roberts, who I haven't met, but I will tell you that I think his work is really quite beautiful. And this is a front hall that captures beautifully the light of the island. But of course, it also references a ship because of the railing above and the overlook from above. It also references the sea. We see the sculpture of the fish. We see the English, the blue and white porcelain, the birds. There's something really incredibly open, bright, and welcoming here. And I could ask you this. In this case, it's vertical siding. That's something vertical paneling, and that's something we only see inside homes. But it's not shiplap. Would it look different? Would this space look different if that paneling had run horizontally? Next. Katie Martinez also captured, she's a designer, published in 2018 in Architectural Digest, and she captured also the luminosity of a white interior. And here the white was intended to both amplify the light and to reference the sea. How do we know that? And this is what I'd like you to start to look at. You can look at a room like that, which you might have just flipped a page or changed the image of on your computer, but now you can start to see that what Katie Martinez is doing here is she's thinking about this room as if it was on a ship. The cabinetry is built in, everything is in a place. It's quite, feels quite interior. It doesn't feel like it's in a modern home. She's also using woven grass rugs and woven material in the lampshade, and she's chosen to use the pink. So there's not a trace of hydrangea here, and yet it feels very much like a fitted out cabin. Next. So whaling imagery and ship design influence so many things that we see all over. The image on the right is from Grayden House. And Roman and Williams were guests at the luncheon. They were luncheon speakers several years ago for Nantucket by Design, and they designed Graydon House. And I think this is such an interesting image because it's so dark, and we'll see another image from Graydon House later on. They've really captured that sense of below decks or a dark inn. It's the opposite of the image on the left, which is by Kathleen Hay, also referencing the sea with the whale tail over the bed, but quite different, this sense of above deck and below deck, of day and night. Next. Markham Roberts again, being inspired by a ship, and here we do see horizontal shiplap in this child's room where the beds are completely built in. He's using also the woven grasses for the chair and the built-in shelving as well on the left, with also some whaling imagery and artifacts. You can see the chair with the wheel on the bottom left. And it feels like a little cabin just right for kids, their own world. Next. Here's the image from Grayden House that uses contrast to tell that story of then and now. And at the below is a guest room, but at the top is the bar. And I'm sure many of you have been in there, and if you haven't, you have to go. It's so atmospheric, and it's so rich, and it makes you feel like you're in another world in a different time. And that itself is a quality of the light. These are very expert designers calling forward an image that responds to the past, but that is completely contemporary. And that's quite artful. The same goes for the room below, the typical guest room, which is much brighter, obviously, feels like another world, but also uses heavily some materials with a great patina, for instance, the leather of the chair, the beautiful painting, and the iron bedstead. Next. I love this because Ellie Coleman is an incomparable designer, and she's created this incredible home on Nantucket. It's much more formal than any other image that we're going to see, and in fact, more formal than almost any that I've seen. But it does call forth the Hadwin House. So I haven't shown you that image. We're waiting. We'll do that at the end. But the Hadwin House, as you know, is an NHA property, and it is quite formal and represents almost a Victorian or pre-Victorian heyday of whaling and wealth. And Ellie references that here. The mural is hand-painted for this house. She's using pink as the accent, but the blue is there in the pottery, and also the model of the ship. brass is almost always the metal that's used in interiors, be they new or old. That's what we see. And we see also the hurricane lamps on the table. So that dining room is quite beautiful, especially the way it flows into the living room. But I also love that room on the left. So she's taken a paneled room. It looks like the captain's study, but not made it dark. And here she's almost using a fruit wood or a fir paneling, very English, and using the typical Nantucket blue and pink. Next. Susan's Isis Green is someone that I do know. She is the maximalist, and I love it because she is definitely, she's an inveterate collector and she's a consummate designer. And in this room, she's captured nearly every classically Nantucket element just in one place, with the exception of austerity. And I'm sure Susan, if she's in this call, is laughing now because I'm going to call her the soul sister to the Monahans. She collects things with a love and a joy that make it isn't austere, but it's welcoming, evocative, and really special. Every single thing in here is special. Next. Gary McBurney's an image of one of his rooms is the image for this year's special Nantucket by Design, but this is the living room in his own home. And again, now you're starting to see it. We see the beautiful use of woven materials, the floor covering and the chair. We see that wonderful hydrangea blue, the use of brass in the convex mirror, and the cotton on the windows, the white walls, the incredible quality of light in here, and the use of Chinese and Japanese antiques in the garden chair and in the table, the side table. The one thing that's so interesting here to me is that he has not used pink. He's used coral on the pillows. And that's because he can. He's really, really an expert, and he can play with this and in a way that not everybody can. Next. This is a room designed by Nantucket's own Audrey Stern, and I love it. I couldn't quite put my finger on what here made this Nantucket, except of course the artwork, which I adore, but the wall covering is I believe it's an upholstered wall, and she's used those nail heads at an even spacing all around the walls above the chair rail, and there is something in that speaks of a period room without this room being traditional in any way. So those touches that appear periodically that show up in the work of designers, it's their sensitivity to the things they love from the past reinterpreted in a new space. Next. Back to Billy Baldwin. So on your right, you'll see his home in New York City, as we saw earlier. And here's a room that he influenced. In Nantucket, he worked with a woman named Nancy Gray. And this is a Billy Baldwin-esque interpretation of Nantucket. You see his classic slipper chairs, but of course here they're upholstered in raffia with a cotton canvas seat. So he's taken his urban form, his urban chic slipper chair, and he's remade it for Nantucket, for this setting. The same goes for the sofas, which are a Parsons-style sofa, and you can see the classic Parsons-style table. It's not white, which it typically would be. It's done in a natural wood, or also it's possibly covered as well in the woven material, and then a simple rug. But you also see something here that evokes actually the oldest house. The rafters on the ceiling are exposed, and they are that dark wood, and the walls are stucco or plastered as they were in the oldest house. And in the corner, you can see the lightship baskets, exposed beams, and in the corner, a green vase as a nod to the crafts of Asia. But overall, the thing that connects this back to classic Nantucket design is that it is austere and it's simple, and yet it's quite beautiful and warm. Next. These two images are of Billy Baldwin's own cottage on Nantucket. Here, in his own space, he was able to marry elegance with comfort and establish a definite sense of place and character, the genius loci. Painted floors, white plaster walls, the exposed structure, in contrast, cotton duck cloth on the slipcovers, a folk art collection, and a sense of coziness and light. I mean, people never even thought about using slipcovers as a design idea until Billy Baldwin came along and made it okay. And not only did he make it okay, it's still thriving today. The way that people remember him and his influence continues. The only other designer I've ever heard referred to in quite the same, or two designers are Albert Hadley, really Albert Hadley, who's influenced generations. And Mark Hampton, I would say, as well. Next. So greater light. Somehow it does come back to greater light. And in this particular next slide, I'm going to show you how this wild, eclectic home that fit these people inspired something almost diametrically opposite, but like twin sisters of the same mother, right? And this is an interior by Hugh Newell Jacobson, published in 2004 in Architectural Digest. Could you flip back for a minute to greater light? And now back to Jacobson. These are the same space. And they capture in many ways the same beautiful light, the same sense of scale, the same feeling that life goes on here. It's an ultra spare and uncannily austere and Quaker-like interpretation of greater light. Thank you. Next. And I know there's some debate about these gabled buildings, but nonetheless, this is another Hugh Newell Jacobson home on Nantucket, and it shows you a modern interpretation of the building on the left, which is started as a lean-to, was English size, made into something a little bit more Georgian with the addition of the white trim. But we see that genius loci is still having its influence from then to now. So interpreting the past is a little bit like reimagining life, new life in the oldest house. How can we reimagine architecture and design on Nantucket without losing the past? Next. So let's return to that idea of genius loci. In closing, and before the very last experience I'm going to share with you, what is our collective responsibility to preserving the wonderful interiors and buildings that make Nantucket unique and truly an exemplar of American design? And when I brought students here a few years ago, they were from Korea. One team of students were Korean, and they had come to New York School of Interior Design because that was their dream, and they were wonderful designers, very imaginative, and the Korean aesthetic is different than what we might even think of as the European or American aesthetic. And when they first started walking around Nantucket, they were agog. they've been in New York for a year or 2 years. But when they got to Nantucket, they said, this is what we always thought America looked like. So there's something there. And how do we preserve it? Well, what is special about Nantucket is that it incorporates in a very authentic way the character and influences of the place in nature and the people that have called it home over the years. Next. So I'm going to show you a short video after this. This is the Hadwin House that is owned by the NHA and preserved by them, now used as an information museum in a sense, but an informational museum to learn about many other things. But for years it was furnished as a traditional house of the period. And the NHA and many other partners on Nantucket are committed to documenting and preserving the important buildings, architecture and interiors, and the urban fabric of Nantucket. Envision Heritage is an initiative of the Preservation Institute of Nantucket, which is run by the University of Florida, directed by Marty Hilton. And they have a program in place where they are trying to document as many interiors and exteriors and cityscapes or townscapes of Nantucket as possible. Climate change is real for Nantucket. Rising sea levels are predicted to threaten many of these important old buildings. Only the exteriors of the buildings are protected now currently, and not very many at all of the interiors. As we could see in the work of these wonderful designers, it takes great sensitivity to accommodate new living in these oldest houses, and also the commitment of the homeowners to recognize the value of preservation where possible, and to allow the PIN, the Preservation Institute, to document preserved interiors before any renovations take place. So in the next slide, we're going to show you the video of the Hadwin House conducted through 3D photography, all digital photography of the Hadwin House. It's like walking through a sugar sculpture. So these cameras are set up to take minute observations of all of the spaces that they document as the, I guess, videographer walks through, but these are doctoral students in preservation. That is not a traditional fan of the period, by the way. Now, what's important about this is, what if, God forbid, there was ever a fire here? This could be lost. But because of this preservation effort and this recording, the information that this kind of photography captures is digital, meaning it is down to the micro millionth of an inch. And anything that is here could be rebuilt according to these specifications. This is the kind of photography and preservation that's happening, or documentation that's happening around the world. Some of our great monuments, the world monuments, that are now being under threat, either due to climate change or to politics. The Buddhist statues in Afghanistan that were destroyed by the Taliban, for example, were preserved this way. So next. These are some readings and references. This will be shared later, but I hope you look at all of these. These are wonderful books. So I hope in closing, I've been very pleased today to present to you on behalf of Nantucket by Design, just a quick idea about what Nantucket design really is, what a Nantucket interior really needs to embody, how almost intangible it is, but how meaningful it is. And I want to thank the NHA again for the opportunity afforded each summer to our wonderful New York School of Interior Design students who creatively reimagine new living in the oldest house, and who are perfect partners between school and historical associations. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. So I'm going to come back on screen in just a second, but I want to encourage all of our viewers to send in your questions using the Q&A function at either the bottom or the top of your screen. And as we do that, as questions are coming in, Ellen, one question I have is, can you think of another place in America that has the same identity from a design standpoint as Nantucket?
I was really trying to think about that in advance, because we know that Walter Beinecke had a big hand in preserving Nantucket and in a sense reinvigorating it. And the only thing that came to mind was in New Mexico, not in Albuquerque, now of course in Taos, I think, but but that's also a recreation of stucco over wooden buildings. And I don't really think there is any place. I think sometimes about the small towns of upstate New York and Ohio, Pennsylvania, they have such an American character that I think it's somewhat the same, but it's not quite as beautiful.
Right. Well,
I'm an upstate New Yorker, so I want to be careful.
Yeah, no. Actually, I love that you said that because, one of the things that actually saved Nantucket was what I call preservation by neglect. After it went into an economic downturn after the end of the whaling industry, people just left the homes alone. They didn't tear them down. They didn't renovate them beyond recognition. And I grew up in Newburgh, New York, which is very much the same way. It went into economic decline. And so you can still find great housing stock there that looks very much like it did in the 19th century. But you're right, it's not quite Nantucket. One of the other questions I had for you was, you talked a lot about light. One of the things that also strikes me about Nantucket and the quality of the light is the proximity to water. And so when you're designing or when your students are working on projects that have that light and the proximity to water, which creates so much reflection, are there things that you have to think about from a design standpoint?
Well, whenever you're working with light, you want to let it in, but you also want to keep it out. And I think that's, I'm probably speaking to many of the non-early risers. I think on Nantucket, you can't help but be an early riser because the light is so strong and crystalline so early in the morning. But, light, control of light is critical. On the other hand, I think on Nantucket, that's not what anybody wants to do. People want to rise early. There's such an emphasis on health and on the healing properties of being near the ocean, of seeing that light, of being exposed to it. When it's a gray day, nobody's really happy. They're waiting for the sun to burn through by the afternoon. And being able to be informed by the water, I think it's the water, the sea is so incredible. And there's so much of it, right? It's accessible everywhere. That is an overriding, it's almost like a magnetic draw for the students. Always.
So one of the other questions we have, and I think you did reference this in your discussion, is, the Nantucket was founded after, obviously, the native peoples by Quakers. And that Quaker aesthetic, the, simplicity and plainness seems to imbue a lot of the architecture. And do you think that is an enduring part of Nantucket's unique look?
Well, when you look at the interior by Ellie Coleman, which is the opposite of austere, it's hard to say enduring, but I think that's where, and which is also very beautiful, but that's where the homeowner, right, comes into play and what they want. But I do think it's part of the enduring look. I think if Billy Baldwin could prove that you could have a modern life in a simple space, it's almost what everybody wants. If you're able to put all your clutter or all your things out of sight and only have the things that give you joy, this is very Marie Kondo, but if you have very beautiful things where you want to see them, you want to be outside most of the time. When you're inside, you want to be at peace. And I think there's something very healthful about that. And the Quaker aesthetic was not just religious, it was also tied to what it was to be fully human. And of course, ideas of God. And I'm not a Quaker, so I can't speak to that part of it, but I think there's something there is something very peaceful. These are minimalist, the exception of the Monahans, these are very minimalist interiors. And you do get that sense of rootedness. You don't have to dress up every day. You don't have to change the decor. It's not that kind of mercantile collection of stuff. You don't need stuff for stuff's sake. The lifestyle in Nantucket is easy. It's at ease. And what I've noticed over the last 5 years is that it's really about people. You go out to meet with people. You go out to have dinner with people or to meet someone for a drink or to take a walk or go to the beach. And your home is for yourself and your family in a place of welcome, but also sanctuary. For the theme of NBD, it really is a sanctuary.
So another question is, given the project that the students at New York School of Interior Design have been doing in partnership with the NHA, how do you think about the preservation of historic interiors? There's lots of rules in Nantucket about
right. And Kelly, you're breaking up a little bit.
Exterior of the home, because Nantucket is, but there's no way to protect the interiors. And how do you talk to your students about it? Yeah.
Well, the student project, if it was up to them when they get started, they would tear everything out. Okay. So that's the starting point. But really, it's more of a challenge to a designer's creativity to work within a parameter. And that's what we ask them to do. And it's how they learn to respect what they have and start to see the beauty of the space. And the oldest house, and even the 1800 house, in that building, the rooms are a perfect square. It's unbelievable, the thoughtfulness that went into it. And in Lancaster's book, you can see many, many floor plans from all these houses that he's documented. The proportion and the sense of regularity is overwhelming. And there's not a designer on earth that can't work with that. I think what people don't like is that it's very compartmentalized. And modern life is much more free-flowing and open. So it's true, the interiors aren't preserved, and many interiors have been lost. The exteriors preserved and the interiors ripped out. And I think what Marty Hilton and his students at the Preservation Institute of Nantucket, and of course all the preservation partners want, let him come in and document your home. Let them film it and capture it through their 3D cameras, the scanning process, and then proceed cautiously to make it more of a modern space. And one thing I noticed right away, much to my shock as a total New Yorker, in the first year we did the oldest house, the doorways are 24 inches wide. You're not putting in a big, full, comfortable sofa a la modern America in that house, but you're entitled to want to. So how can we accommodate that and still retain the character between outside and inside?
Right. Good. Very, very good point. In fact, I had my home, this is my second home that I've had documented by Marty's project. I'm really glad that my prior home was, because the interiors were removed, and it was a very important historic interior. So I'm so pleased that they did that work. The final question I have is, as you, whether you're working on, projects yourself or advising your students, are there things that have come about during this period of quarantine that you are re-examining or really discussing with students about how they approach interiors? You just referenced one, which is a lot of people think they didn't want to live in a compartmentalized way until they started sharing their home with adults. I have 4 adults in my house right now and a 2-year-old, and we're really glad that we have lots of little rooms that we can retreat to when we have things to do. But how has that conversation changed with your students?
Oh, we're coming back into our fall semester in September, and it's definitely going to inform the conversation in the classroom, because it's true. We took for, everything. The whole idea of Genius Loci is about place, but then of course we're all products of our time. And the move toward openness was part of a modern lifestyle, and not having parlors, not having living rooms, nothing private. But it's true. And this time, what do you want more of? You want to be able to shut the door and let other people take care of the barking dog sometimes. And I think we will talk about that, because personal space is part of space planning, and privacy, quiet, and a place for, to be trite, to say sanctuary. Everybody deserves that if they can have it. And our staff at New York School of Interior Design have been working, and students made all kinds of last minute arrangements, to be able to stay in New York when this hit. And some of them have not had such an easy space. Their homes are not set up for work, and they've had to work from home. So I think, it will inform the curriculum coming forward, very, very much so. But I will go back to one thing, which is that Mariah Mitchell's house was not, it's small, and there's no room for a private room for her there. And yet she found that space. She made that happen for herself. It was all hers. And I love It's probably the most beautiful space that I've seen in any building there. And you're nodding your head because you love it too, right? It speaks to us. And I think that's an important icon of what we can do even without very much room.
Well, that's a great response. It relates to a question one of our audience asked, which is what can we learn for this period of time from that type of design? When I saw you put up that image, which I've always loved, it's very evocative of, the whole concept of a room of one's own, and just the fact that it's your own, and you can get away regardless of how big it is or how furnished it is. That sense that you're sort of cosseted and have some privacy. That's one of the things that makes it so special. So I would agree with you. That is definitely something we've learned. Well, this has been an extraordinary time. You've been very generous, and not just today, but in the past 5 years. And it's always struck me that we have you here every year, and you are such the consummate, academic and expert, and we're so lucky that I thought, okay, now I'll prevail upon you as my friend and colleague to actually share all of your wisdom. I encourage everybody to get Ellen's amazing book called Home, which is a fantastic publication. It's up there on her shelf. I've got one. But thank you again. And Ellen, we look forward to a very long partnership with you and the students, and thank you for everything that you do.